Very good evening and welcome. I'm Dr. Matthew Bunson, and welcome once again to another of CDU Presents webinars. Tonight we have what is a topic I think that is very much in discussion across all aspects of culture, law, media, and that, of course, is marriage today. The question is being raised in a lot of circles is what exactly is marriage? Is marriage still relevant to us today? And as Catholics, how do we respond to the recent developments across all of culture in terms of how we define marriage? What constitutes a marriage? Is it still a sacrament as far as we're concerned? Well, tonight we're going to be answering your questions about marriage. Marriage today, we just had two synods on family life in Rome in 2014 and 2015. We had an apostolic exhortation called Amoris Laetitia. We're going to be talking about that a little bit tonight, that dug deeply into family life, not without controversy. And in order to discuss all of this, we have brought together a wonderful panel from CDU, of CDU professors. We begin with Father Bevil Bramwell. Good evening, Father.
Greetings.
And we're joined also by Professor Chris Padgett.
Hi.
Professor Stephen Bozza.
Hello.
Good evening. And Professor Alissa Thorell. All of them are experts in one way or another in moral theology and family life. I'm going to go around the panel very quickly in a second to get a few details about who you are, in particular why you have expertise in family life. But I'd like to start with a quick question for our panel, and that is, with the exception of you, Father, all of us, I think, are married. I'm assuming that's correct. So let's start, I think, with the person who has probably I'm not sure if the most kids, but certainly the one who's been married the longest. So Stephen, talk a little bit about your own experience as a husband and father.
Well, I don't have children of my own, unfortunately. God didn't bless us in that regard, but I have a stepson and a beautiful granddaughter. Been married 32 years, and our life has been it was good for us. It's a decision that I'm glad that we made, and every day I'm grateful for God bringing Jen into my life, and Brad and Kathy and our little granddaughter Maddie. So I'm just very content and happy to be there.
And aside from your professorship here at the Catholic Distance University, I know you work very intently for the Archdiocese of Philadelphia.
Yeah, I'm the director for the Office for Life and Family. So my work here entails marriage preparation, marriage ministry, the traditional pro-life work. When marriages fail, we pick up the pieces with some ministries that we offer to suffering marriages or the divorced and separated. So it runs the gamut.
It does, doesn't it? And Chris, I know you have 9 kids, 5 girls and 4 boys. The oldest is 26 and the youngest is 6. You also have 2 grandkids. I got to be honest, you look too young to have grandchildren. But you are also very actively involved in ministry of Catholic family and marriage. So let's hear a little bit more about that ministry.
Yep. Well, this year, starting in January, we focused basically 20 plus years of ministry into this avenue of Catholic family and marriage. That's the website, catholicfam.org. And what it is a ministry that's meant to empower, encourage, and equip families and marriages. We know that not every marriage has a family, and not every family has a functioning marriage, but we definitely know that there's a need and that there's been a crisis within marriage and family for far too long. So in a lot of ways, we're the great cheerleaders. We come alongside through active programming, boots on the ground ministry events. We have resources that we're providing, bulletins that go into parishes all over the country. And then in addition to that, my wife and I for the last 3 years have been doing all the pre-Cana events in the Diocese of Syracuse, New York. So writing about it, thinking about it, talking about it, it's definitely our world. And I've been blessed to be able to teach even a class when I was at Franciscan for 4 years on Christian marriage. And I just love this area, and I'm passionate about it because I grew up in a broken home, and I know what it's like firsthand to see a family fall apart. So it's my desire to help wherever I can.
Yeah. Plus, you're one of the very few people I know who can pull off a hat and coat and tie at the same time.
Listen, you don't want to see my hair today. I'm
You do
telling you.
that very nicely. Alissa, I think you're the probably the youngest person here, not to mention the newest mom.
Yeah, that's true. I have a 9-month-old right now. She's my second, so we have two, and they're both girls, and they're great little sisters. It's a lot of fun. So that honestly occupies a huge amount of my time. I was gonna say my big ministry right now is just, living it. But it's been great. I'm not sleeping much, but that's, that's not the most important thing until it builds
Exactly.
up. You
And
start
finally,
falling.
Father, I know you've been involved in counseling and marriage prep and in your very long life as a priest. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And just also for the record, I have been married for myself for about a year and a half. So I'm probably the shortest married person here. So I claim no vast expertise in marriage. But I would like to start our discussion tonight by reading a quote, a series of quotes, in fact, starting with the Pastoral Constitution of the Church in the Modern World, Gaudium et Spes, by the Second Vatican Council, that says very plainly, very bluntly, God himself is the author of marriage. The Catechism then goes on to say that the vocation of marriage is written in the very nature of man and woman as they come from the hand of the Creator. So here we have the creation of marriage. God is the author, and the place of man and woman. Now, people have been writing dissertations on this topic, and the church has been meditating on it throughout her long and beautiful history. But I'd like first to elicit a comment from each of you on that simple reality of God as the author of marriage, starting with you, Father.
Well, yeah, the document on Gaudium et Spes did a wonderful job. I always recommend to married couples and those who are thinking about marriage that they go and read that, because we've got to get our criterion of what do we consider to be relevant. And if we're taking relevance from some politicians' married life or some actors' married life or our social circle's married life, we are not getting to the main point of marriage. We're looking at human constructs, and really we have to start with God, reflecting on God and the fact that we image God. And you can take this point a long way, because within the divinity there is an eternal relation between Father and Son, not a gendered relationship, but in eternal terms there is a self-sacrificial love between the Father and the Son, which we then image if we choose to get married to the church, like moi, or get married to a precious human being like all of you. And that's where this origination in God is the crucial starting point.
Yeah, we'll go to Alissa.
Yeah, I mean, I'll continue with what Father's talking about, but I think that we have to keep in mind that when we're talking about something like marriage, we want to look at the beginning and the end. And so, if we're going to hold that we're coming from God in our first principle of our creation and our existence, and that He invites us into relationship, then we can also keep in mind that that's where we're going to end, or we want to, be focused on that as our goal. And I think that that enlightens what marriage is so much, because you have to keep a much broader perspective when you're looking at what we're doing, spending our time being married on earth. It's not only the here and now, but it's where did it come from and where is it going to go? We want it to be leading us towards God always, and we do that through the other person and through our participation in that. So it has a broader perspective.
Yeah, Chris.
Well, I love what both of you are saying. In fact, what I think about God as the author of marriage is it's absolutely imperative to see it as the reflection of who God is as Trinity. So a place of constant self-giving, self-sacrificing, as Father said, that avenue or that place of expressing love is the great opportunity to show the world that there is such a thing as a relationship, a loving relationship that can endure all things, whether it's sickness, health, rich, poor, till death do us part. So, I mean, it's a holy opportunity to reflect this life-giving love within time and space. And I love that. What an amazing opportunity. So it's certainly not the place of great selfishness that our culture would like it to be.
Yeah, Stephen?
Everything that they've said, I would have thought of saying myself, except to say that the nuptial mystery is also the paschal mystery, or a representation of the paschal mystery. And so you can't look at the paschal mystery without having some clue, some idea of what that nuptial mystery is all about. You know, and I would also say that when we say that God is the author of marriage, he exhibits it everywhere, in particular in the Eucharist. I mean, when you think about what we do in receiving the Eucharist is what married couples do all the time when receiving each other.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't separate the two. And so would the church say, as she does, that God is the author of marriage? I would go one step further and say God is marriage.
Mm-hmm. So we have among the many beautiful images and realities of marriage, the image of the family as the domestic church. I'd love to sort of proceed to that imagery if we could. I'll start with you, Chris.
So marriage is the domestic church? I mean, honestly, this is something I've been thinking about for a long time. That the opportunity of being priest, prophet, and king, first and foremost, to our wife and to our kids is such an incredible, or our husband and our kids, is such an incredible opportunity. It really is the place, hopefully, that our children see for the very first time a complete gift of self-sacrifice, learning virtue over vice. You know, the first place where they're going to hear the gospel. And so in a lot of ways for us, even as a family, we've noticed that there are times that when we sit around and we ask for not only what are the prayer requests that they have, but what can we pray for that they're aware of. I mean, in a way, it's teaching and modeling for them what it looks like to be selfless, what it looks like to intercede for others, and to tangibly go out and actively be Christ's hands and feet. So they don't accidentally live out, you know, the reality of being in a domestic church. They have to be grounded and grow in that reality by watching mom and dad live that out. So we're big proponents of modeling it.
Mm-hmm. Now, regarding that, the imagery of the domestic church, Alissa, how is that played out? I mean, Chris is giving us a few points. We're being pointed in a direction for that, but how is that actually sort of functionally lived out? And how would you describe the connection between the domestic church and the church universal?
Well, I mean, it's so broad. There are so many ways that we could, emphasize, but what first comes to mind is that when you are proposing the faith to someone, right now my older daughter is 4.5, and so many of our conversations seem to focus on, just very simple things. And a lot of it comes down to a trust. She believes everything I'm telling her completely without a doubt, and I think that when you are proposing the faith to someone, telling them, proclaiming to them Christ and that they're loved, and you say, God knows you and loves you, it's much harder to believe that if you haven't felt that at some point in your human experience. It's much harder to know a filial relationship to the Father without having experienced it yourself. And it's certainly possible. Grace makes that possible, but that's really where the family has such an opportunity to, build a lasting building block, a foundation for them that any time in their life, they can revisit that knowledge that they are coming into life loved already, and that their existence is, continued within that. And, to be a child, even as a parent, how often do we feel that we don't know what we're doing, or if we're doing it correctly, or if we could have done it better. But, we ourselves received that love from God through our church, through the sacramental life that we participate in. And that in turn can remind us, how to show that to our children and to invite them into it so that they will one day pass that on to their children, So I think it's a ongoing process, of course.
Yeah, and Stephen, and this is for Stephen and Father, but I'd love for all of you to be chiming in here at any point. Let's talk about the fundamental reality of the sacrament of marriage and what we certainly as a church understand to be that sacrament. So, Steve?
Well, we've often said that, and that's what we teach, that sacraments have matter and form, and of course the form of marriage are the wedding vows. But what always struck me when I first started pondering all these things was the fact that the matters are very bodies, because it's what we say in the altar is completed, or well, we use the term consummated, but it's more than that. It's completed, it's ratified, it's celebrated in the nuptial embrace. And as any sacrament would give us grace, it's that nuptial embrace that gives us the grace to live it out.
Mm-hmm.
To live out the vows that we've made. And there are plenty of examples that we could give in terms of how that nuptial embrace, when it's true and authentic, is something that allows us to now go out and be that leaven to the people around us. Because marriages have a personality, and that personality can take the form of the couple that it's involved in. And so if that marital embrace is truly authentic, then that marital personality is going to be one of love, and one of giving, one of celebrating, one of being able to let that grace permeate into the lives of the people around you.
Mm-hmm. Father?
Yeah, I think where you talk about personality, Steve, I would talk about spiritual union that parallels the physical union, so that you have essentially one spirit with two poles, if you like, that is evidenced by things like the lawyer Tertullian wrote, I think in the 4th century, a letter to his wife, because he was a circuit lawyer and consequently wasn't at home all the time. But he wrote this incredible letter, which we still have, to his wife, saying he missed going to Mass with her while he was traveling. He missed going to feed the poor while he was traveling. And he goes through this long list of things that are all, if you like, external charitable works, that it's not two people doing it, it's one person, this couple, Tertullian and his wife, they would be feeding the poor, they would be doing whatever they're doing. And it's a beautiful list, which I'm not kind of recalling terribly well here. But that one personality that you attribute to the marriage is this incredible spiritual union. And that's what I always find is missing from some of these more superficial kinds of marriages that we see in the public square.
Well, relating to that very public square, and you've made a perfect bridge to my next question of pagan culture. The extraordinary quality of Christian marriage compared to pagan marriage, and the witness of the Christian couple and the Christian family in what was a Roman pagan environment. And we can jump ahead, as you do, Father, to today, and the importance of marriage as a witness, as family to a witness. Well, let's meditate on that a little bit if we could. Anybody wants to chime in here? Let's start with you, Chris, on the importance of the witness of marriage in culture, because we're going to be discussing quite a few challenges to marriage coming up.
Yeah, well, honestly, again, right now we have a problem because even within Christian marriage, there's not a lot of witness. I mean, there's a lot of misery and a lot of ridiculous behavior. So I'm not sure we're doing a great job of witnessing much besides the general norm. Here's the deal. In an
Ray of sunshine, you.
Yes, this is usually father's job to be sort of a
I try not to lose hope, but the thing is that in an ideal scenario, the amazing thing is when we talk about the sacrament of marriage, it's the avenue that both together can become the saints that they're called to be. And so when that happens, it is an appealing witness to the world around because it bespeaks the reality to which they long. Like they want that. And so when you see a holy couple that is really living joyfully, that love, that selflessness, then the world around's like, gosh, like what is that? Because it's so different compared to the general norm and the average of what's going out there. And then the truth about that is if not only does it bespeak the beauty of this selflessness to the world, but it also, I think it brings forth and generates more callings to priesthood because it is so beautiful than the sacrifice to give that that marital dynamic up in that fashion now goes on to the next level in terms of marrying the bride of Christ of the church. So, I mean, honestly, here's the problem is that we see the high standard of a relationship and the world says it's here. Like, how great is it if we could have this heavy breathing, passionate moments, but that could just be you have asthma. But for us within the Catholic dynamic, we say, no, it's way up here. This is the possibility and the opportunity. And people can't even fathom that because it's rarely seen. And not to beat a dead horse, but the truth is that a lot of people that are even succeeding in marriage look so depressed. There's nothing appealing about it.
So here we have let's go back to
all my buttons, doctor.
Well, let's go back to the Synod on the Family, and especially in the discussions in the lead up to it, especially in 2014, where what were we hearing, including from a rather prominent German cardinal, this idea that marriage and all of the aspects of the authenticity of marriage, the legitimacy of marriage, that in so many ways that these are ideals. How can we possibly live up to them? So the natural logical question to follow that is, why should we bother? So why should we bother to strive for the ideal of a Christian marriage, to live the sacrament of marriage?
Why does any football team bother to try and strive for the Super Bowl? It's so impossible. It's so ridiculous. What are the odds, But why do we strive? I mean, good grief. I mean, like, it's an amazing thing to be in a marriage that's not just surviving, but thriving. Like, why would you not want that? I mean, hello. I'm sorry. Well, I've already talked enough. I'm passing it on to someone else.
Say, my condolences to Mrs. Padgett this evening.
He's happy to have a break.
Okay, the horse is dead, all right? So.
And buried. Alissa, to you.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, no, I mean, Chris he's right. No, but I think that we have to keep in mind that not only are we looking at what we can do for the culture, but I think in a lot of ways we want to remember that, and I mean, I'm not saying that, not to say that Chris wasn't saying this, he was, but I think just to emphasize, when we begin looking at how that personal call starts off, the one person to the other into that vocation, I think we're really looking at, each person working on a desire for holiness, and then that coupling together, that working together becomes, as Father was saying earlier, a unitive effort. But I think that we have to keep in mind that a lot of people haven't made it so far into that unitive element yet and are still trying to work on the individual, and maybe sometimes failing to even invite the other person into that or to allow help to come in. And I think that, a lot of our recent discussions on evangelization have involved going back to, our own humility, our own return to the sacraments of confession, and, seeking personal holiness, so that when we turn to someone and say, you need to pursue this, or you need to love God, it's not hypocritical at all, and that our lived witness, kind of matches what we're saying. And I think that in a lot of ways, there are a lot of marriages where I feel like people haven't had a chance to sit down for 5 minutes and pray on their own, and or with their spouse. But a lot of times I think it comes down to people kind of get caught up in living this life that we have right now, society, and all of its busyness and work and everything, and failing to remember that we just have to take some time to know that we're loved by God, and then work with our spouse in that way, so that it's a unitive effort, and not just an individual side by side, moving along a track, but not cooperatively doing so.
Mhm. Well, Steve, you've been notably silent on some, but you said something at the very start of our conversation here tonight. You said to the effect that you're very happy that you got married. And one of the images that has always struck me from the very first, when I was first a little kid studying marriage, that just struck me, was this idea of trying to get your spouse to heaven. And now I'm suspecting that my wife will be in heaven long before I am, without the need for purgatory. Steve, talk about that, because it's an image that I think people don't necessarily really think about much today.
Well, I think my wife is still trying to get me into heaven. I think sometimes it's been a long haul for her. And I'm joking and everything, but we have to. I think what's missing in the whole discussion of marriage today is, did God, and Alyssa brought this up, did God call this man and woman together in marriage? This is something that God called us into. Now I know, I mean, I met my wife in a prayer group, and so we were always discerning what's going on in our lives, discerning this, discerning that, discerning the other thing. But there came a point in time where we came to a discernment that God wanted us to marry each other.
Yeah.
And that means everything.
Yeah.
I mean, that means everything. And because, everybody around this panel, and every married couple that's ever lived, will always have, struggles and difficulties, and, trying to just having that, that two become one in the head. I mean, I'm a strong-willed Italian. She's a strong-willed Irishman, and we were both single for a long time, and just those first couple of years of just breaking down our own stubborn ways, that wasn't easy. It just wasn't easy, especially at our age. And and having,
you must be 25 at least, Steve.
I was 31. My wife was 35, for Pete's sake. And
She's old enough, it's, if I'm remembering the statistics, that if you marry somebody around the age of 35, don't even think about trying to change them.
no. I mean, so the point of the matter is that takes a lot of work.
Yeah.
And if we didn't know that God called us together for marriage, it could have been a different outcome for us.
Yeah. I want to come back to the whole discernment question and the preparation question, but I want to make sure that we take our questions from the audience. So Taylor's asking, when the life of the Trinity is our model and underpinning for relationship and marriage, how can we inform the secular world of this rather esoteric idea?
Well, you've got to live it yourself, first of all, and that will start the curiosity going, because it just struck me when Chris was speaking and also when Steve was speaking, that there is a way in which calling marriage an ideal is almost a language game, because in fact, all the possibilities are there, all the grace is there. You know, this is not my project alone. It's me and my wife, if I had a wife, in the church with all the sacramental aids that we have, the teaching, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the ideal is really not the right word for dealing with this phenomenal reality that is sitting right there at our noses if we're going to pay attention to it.
Well, the word ideals almost implies that it's unobtainable.
Unattainable.
That
Yes, exactly.
Right.
And
you've hit on something very important, Father, and I want to ask this to everybody because you're not alone in this. I mean, you have, as a couple, as a family, there are many things available to you. The graces of the sacrament, the resources of the church. Let's talk a little bit about that right now. In terms of there is a feeling that you have in culture in a lot of ways that families are abandoned, that they're going it alone, that they have nowhere to turn, and yet here we have the church with all of those resources that you've just been describing, Father. Anyone?
I kind of think, and maybe it's just me, but I kind of think that the idea that families are alone in it, in some parts of me wants to say that it's because of their own unwillingness to partner with other families. Families are partnering with each other in many, many different ways. And to feel alone is unnecessary, in my opinion, because, you know, we have the church we have organizations, we have PTAs, we have people homeschool, we have those supports, we have supports everywhere. I don't think maybe people come out of themselves to want to build community or relationships with other families.
Yeah.
Chris, you know, how do you feel about that? I just think that it's through our own fault that we feel alone.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and I can agree with that. The problem right now, though, is this is the ultimate question. Where do people go to get that community? I mean, that's the question that we're asking in church. Where is everybody? Because they're not coming into church right now. So here's where they are. You got programs for kids. You got CCD. You got religious ed programs. You got teen programs, whether it's Life Teen or whatever youth program you have. And then you have some stuff for college kids with Focus. But there really isn't a lot for married couples and families. That's part of the reason we created our ministry, is that it is the missing area right now when it comes to direct, opportunities to build community. Outside of, I'll meet that family at the sporting event where our kids are playing basketball, baseball together, or maybe I'll get together with somebody from work. There really isn't a lot of community dynamics. Now, is it there? Yeah, you can go to the church and there's some opportunities. Maybe it's an annual parish mission. Maybe it's a whatever, that's happening. But that's a need. I see it as a need. We can easily say that maybe it's because people won't go outside of themselves. But the truth is, let's say that's true, right? Let's say it is that they're not going outside. We got to figure out and almost kind of be innovative with ways to create avenues for community. That being said, I'm oddly enough a bit of an introvert. So it's funny that God calls me to public ministry, and I'm literally on the stage constantly. But when I come home, the last thing I want to do is go to a church event, not to be weird about it. I want to just hang out with my family and just relax or go do something fun with them. So, there's a lot of problems right now when we talk about tangible, practical ministry with family dynamics, building community, and providing resources. But last thing I'll say about this is that when we were talking about this from a sacramental perspective, for me, as a husband and a father in the family, it is imperative that the sacraments, that is a community event that we do, regardless of how it meet some sort of expectation. We're going to go receive Jesus, whether the homily's bad, the music bad or not. We're going as a family, period. We're going to go to reconciliation because we need that. And not everything is about making us have a warm, fuzzy feeling. We're going to go because we need that encouragement and that empowerment from the Lord. So, yeah, I mean, it's a can right there. There's a whole lot of good stuff we could talk about.
Yeah. Well, a question from our audience tonight. Anne is asking, and this is apropos to this very conversation, about what are the resources at hand for discernment, whether one is called to marriage. A basic question, but we have a lot of focus on discernment to the priesthood, religious life. But the discernment of the vocation in life, in particular marriage, I think is one that is sometimes underrepresented in a lot of these discussions. So, Father, you raised your hand, so off to you.
Ignatius of Loyola has a question in his discernment section. Do you even know that it is the will of God that you get married? Question mark. That's where he starts, and that's where our whole conversation started. And okay, you're going to have to build it up between the two of you to find out whether this is the will of God, because it may not be what the will of God is. Are you used to discerning the will of God in other things?
Alissa?
Sure. No, I think that's a question that is on the minds of many people. And I was just revisiting some of Mors Laetitia, and I think Pope Francis himself even, says a few different times that, the formation of couples is so important and a very, heightened area for pastoral focus right now. And I think, whatever avenue we're called to, we have to be sure that at least we are in a conversation with God, that we know that we're meeting him each day, whether it's in scripture and, other devotional prayer, in the Eucharist, and, possibly adoration, various ways that we can sit and listen and say, Lord, what do you want from me? And to do that every day. And the more often that we're able to take that moment, and the more often that we're able to apply that to the smallest of things, to be just trying to be open to the promptings of the Holy Spirit, I think it allows us to, reach some of those bigger moments in our lives and to have a certain authenticity of whether or not, we are called to that, or this is something that is true and good and beautiful, or if this is something that, maybe is good and beautiful, but not for us, because I think many people end up discerning away from certain vocations, whether that is marriage or religious life or priesthood, over time, and they have to be okay with knowing it's not just a done deal from the beginning, that you do have to discern, and that is a process and it does take time. But I think the first place to start is wanting to know if it's the will of God. That's you're on the right track already if you're asking that question. So.
Well, actually bothering to ask the question and then actually realizing that, oh, I have to put some work into this.
Exactly.
And just throwing in a point there, when we're asking the question, yes, God is going to answer us. Are we aware that God answers us? Mm-hmm. And that's where Ignatius has his whole idea of consolation and desolation. Yeah. And once you've felt it, you really do know, yes, God is affirming or God is not affirming what I am holding in my head in prayer. And that experience of being a discerning person is, and of course, we're talking about relevance of marriage to the whole world. If I'm a discerning person, I can make choices about other things other than marriage, but I'm learning discernment in my relationship to my wife, and we can show ourselves to the world as discerning people. Mm-hmm. And that will mean there are TV programs we won't watch. There are, pick an area of human endeavor. What kind of language do I use? And so forth.
Yeah, but Father, that also, as far as the world is concerned, is rather a bizarre notion, because it presupposes that you have a fairly active prayer life.
gee, what a strange thing. I mean, you know, it's kind of, yeah, that's how I live, because my most spectacular relationship in my life is my relationship to God. And if something else is more spectacular, my new car or whatever, then there's something wildly wrong with my value system. And this, I think, comes down to, you know, where did I come from? How did I develop? Because we do learn slowly over the days and years how to pray, how to find out what is important, how not to be attached to things that are less important. It's a developmental process that is going on for us as individuals, and we're trying to be applying that now to this extraordinary question: am I going to spend the rest of my life with this human being?
Yeah. Well, but you have raised now an important series of additional questions. First, how do we, once we have discerned that we are in fact called to marriage, how do we prepare for it? And one of the things that we see today, and this is a question from someone here this evening, the question, for example, of cohabitation is probably one of the most significant that any couple will face, and that is something of a crisis. And Chris, I can already see that I have pushed another one of your buttons. Uh, the levels of cohabitation, this was noted by the Synod of Bishops. This is certainly noted by Pope Francis and Amoris Laetitia. So I'll just throw out that one word, cohabitation, and let you all have it.
Well, I remember for me when Linda and I, my wife and I, were discerning getting married, cohabitation was not even in the cards. It wasn't even an option. There was not even a question. To be honest, I had a friend of mine that actually eloped because they were wanting to be married so bad, and they knew cohabitation wasn't an option. So elopement was the solution. Well, now Linda and I were teaching all these pre-canons. I would guess that about at least 90 to 95% of the couples wanting to get married in the church with the church's blessing are already cohabitating. And we have one day. We have one day to get with them. I mean, and try to convince them. You know what? One job, the only job I have in that is to convince them to let Jesus into their marriage. That's basically it, you know. But you want to talk about, I mean, sometimes I tell them, you know, I mean, maybe during this just like last hurrah before you get married, that you like live separately. I mean, it's this ridiculous notion. It's almost like a completely foreign concept. I don't know where the ball got dropped, but I have a feeling in every possible place it was dropped, because they're clueless that that's even something that should be considered, at least as far as the people we interact with.
Well, there's a lie in that cohabitation genre. And the lie is, well, we just want to see if we're compatible.
Yeah.
And see if this is going to work. And study upon study, especially for the National Marriage Project in Rutgers University, they've done a number of studies on cohabitation, and they've found beyond a shadow of a doubt that those persons who cohabitate before they get married, oftentimes they divorce at a higher rate
Oh yeah.
than everyone else. So it's a big lie that people are buying into. And
Yes.
Chris, your thought, well, I don't know how we started, how the ball got dropped in here. Bottom line, the answer, as far as I can see, is the prevalence of contraception. Contraception allows or facilitates cohabitation.
Yeah, but here's what I would say to that, Stephen, is that for me growing up Protestant, contraception was not a problem, but cohabitation was. So that's an interesting argument. I'm not saying it's no, but at least in the circle I was in, it wasn't connected like that.
I've been in this business for about 20 years now, 25 years. And in the 90s, when I was doing marriage preparation for another diocese, we would have people send in their applications with 2 different addresses. But when you got to the marriage preparation event, it came out that they were living together.
Yeah.
Then about 10 years later, they stopped lying. And now they have the same address. They don't lie about it anymore. Okay, so maybe that's a good thing they're not lying. But at the same time, it's gotten so widespread and accepted that now they feel like there's no shame to it.
Yeah.
So, we've it's a societal, it's a cultural problem. How to get out of it, Lord only knows. But the biggest thing that I could say about that in tonight's forum is that that whole process or concept that we at least try it out is one big lie.
Yeah. Yeah.
So Pope Francis in Amoris Laetitia has a chapter, it's actually, I think it's chapter 4, that's this beautiful meditation on marriage. But he also uses parts of this apostolic exhortation to call on the church to do a much better job of preparing people for marriage. Now, all of you, in one sense or another, you're involved in helping friends, family, and fellow parishioners across diocesan scale, across parish scale, to get married. So we've established here tonight at least some of the basic principles of the sacrament of marriage. What are some of your suggestions for a couple preparing to get married? They've discerned marriage, hopefully they're not cohabitating, but what are some of the practical tips just to start this process of deepening an awareness of the sacrament? And as Stephen, I knew somebody was going to say it tonight, marriage is hard work. To get ready for that.
You mean, are you talking about before they get engaged or during the engagement?
Well, during engagement, as you're preparing for marriage.
I think one of the best tools that we have in the church today are the premarital inventories. The focus inventory or prepare and enrich. I say that because if it's done early enough in the marriage preparation process, they could take really a good look at who they are, of their needs, their desires, their joys, their hopes, their dreams, or all these things, and then list them and then talk about them. And the priest or the deacon who's preparing the couple for marriage could take a look at this. And I've seen people say, no, I don't think we should go any further, because there's not always that opportunity to really delve into the issues that could cause a divorce down the road. So I think a premarital inventory is almost, I mean, we don't make it mandatory here in Philadelphia, but it ought to be.
Well, I mean, given the, and Chris, you were noting this, given the rather spare amount of time that you're actually given to work with a couple in preparation for marriage, it seems to me that kind of an inventory is at least some sort of a stopgap.
Well, we've had some of our success stories is finding out that couples don't get married, like they stop the process. Like, I feel like that's a great success story when it comes to a pre-Cana event, because all of a sudden they realize, wait a minute, we're not ready. That's exactly what we want to have happen by the end of that day. Either you are ready, let's move forward. Here's what we know what we're getting into, or my gosh, I'm not ready. So I like the inventory things a lot, because what I try to do is I look at the 3 relational structures that every couple is familiar with: parents, friendship, and the previous dating experiences. And I have them kind of go through and look at the pros and the cons. What is the positive and what is the negative? They look at each of those, and the reality of that they are bringing all of those experiences into that marriage. And I do some exercises that show them how just even the way that they did things like Christmas and vacations are showing up in how they're going to be doing that in the future. And boy, oh boy, that's like a wake-up call. I think there's such an idealized version a lot of times of like, we love each other, we're ready to get married, this is going to be great. But that sobering reality of, here's a whole bunch of issues that you need to really talk about before you walk down that aisle. And so again, it's like total immersion. I mean, we have that day to try to hurry up and find any trigger that we can to cause them to think about and talk together about an issue that could be a problem. And I usually tell these kids, because many of them are kids, is that nobody wakes up usually one day and says, you know, today I think I'm going to commit adultery and wreck my marriage. That's not usually how it works. What happens is it's little tiny yeses to little tiny selfish acts, and over the long haul, it wears down a marriage. It destroys it. And what we try to do is to get them to talk about the possibility of certain things that could, over a period of time, wear them down. So if this is a huge part of I love what you said, though, about doing that inventory. I think that's exactly right. Somehow you got to speak the language to them where they can start addressing some of these ideas a little bit more carefully. Anyway.
And just to add on to that, I think that we can also encourage them to really consider how they communicate, because, you know, Pope Francis emphasized that as well, but I think it's just an obvious thing about human nature that dialogue is so vital. We don't read each other's minds even when we wish we could. And as much as time allows us to read body language and to know each other's facial expressions, or, you know, the moods that we're carrying around with us, that doesn't fully communicate, you know, the reason behind that face or the reason behind the mood. And I think that so often just not having the skill set to talk to one another, to really sit down and express what we're feeling and why we're feeling it, or even to say we don't know why, but to say that we need, you know, some camaraderie in those experiences that we go through in day-to-day life. I think that's, you know, a really important element. If they don't have that as a foundation, it's much harder to build it when you're in the thick of it. You know, it's something you really want to work on ahead of time.
I think also too, we have to be there are a number of ways that things that we do for married couples, you know, or engaged couples before they get married. There's the inventory, there's the actual pre-Cana, if you want to call it that, or marriage preparation program. There's the natural family planning piece component to it. But in some of these, in somewhere, we have to be talking to our couples about priorities, because people, I think part of our problems, and I see this all the time when people call my office looking for you know, some counseling, marriage counseling or what have you. After talking to them for a little while, on a number of occasions, what really starts to come out in the conversation is that they don't have their priorities set.
Yeah.
You know, look, when you decide to get married, it doesn't mean that you give up your friendships and your, you know, your time that you spend with the guys or you know, or the girls or what have you. But there's a way of now transforming that in a way that is not going to be detrimental to your family or to your marriage. And so,
Yeah.
you know, if you want to, you know, go out with your friends for a little bit and have a beer or whatever, there's nothing really wrong with that. But when that takes over priorities, like when you decide that you're going to go to happy hour, because in Philadelphia there are plenty of places here where you could just go and have a couple drinks with people. Why would I want to go if I'm working at Merck or some other big company and go to happy hour with all the men and women in the office, and my wife said no.
Yeah.
That doesn't make, you know, there are certain things you just don't do anymore.
Mm-hmm.
You know? And there's got to be some type of reality check that says, okay, we have to put God first, we have to put our marriage second, and then we have to put our children after that, and then everything else comes after that. Everything else comes after that.
Yeah.
And so I don't think that there's enough focus or emphasis on setting priorities.
Well, real quick, Jennifer from Australia, greetings, is asking Steve if
I can't hear you.
On, can you hear me now?
No, I can't hear you.
Yes.
Okay. So Jennifer from Australia is asking for a few more details on the cohabitation rates, the report that you mentioned just a little while ago, I think from Rutgers, is that right?
Rutgers, it's called the Marriage Project.
Okay.
And unfortunately, I don't have those statistics in my mind to be able to speak to you truthfully about them. But you can go online and look at the Marriage Project. One of their reports is called the State of Our Unions. And so if you Google State of Our Unions, the Marriage Project, you'll be able to see the statistics that I was telling you about.
Okay. And actually, the very question that I was going to ask next that I wanted to raise is raised by somebody in our audience. That is, there are three issues that impact Catholic marriage. Our culture is trending to no commitment, no contracts for cell phones, no commitments for joining a gym. So being called to a lifetime of commitment is rather countercultural, hence cohabitation. Number two, the continued effects of the sex abuse scandal erode the credibility of the church. And then how does the church explain marriages only between male and female when society views love and marriage between same-sex couples as the same? Now, before we get into that, and I can see you're eager, I want to read something again from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Authority, stability, and the life of relationship within the family constitutes the foundation for freedom, security, and fraternity within society. The family as an institution is prior to any recognition by public authority, which has an obligation to recognize it. So here we are. We started our conversation tonight with God is the author of marriage, and we have the Catechism affirming that marriage exists prior to the state, and yet we have the state today redefining marriage itself. So I'd love to hear from everybody in the time that we have left. Let's talk about those stressors, what you see are the key problems and challenges faced by married couples today, by families, and what you think are some of the solutions.
Well, let me jump into a couple things here, and then I'll just, pass the baton. But this whole idea of culture, the erosion due to sex abuse and male and, female versus, male and male or whatever. I want to speak about that for just a second. See, it's interesting because people do long for commitment. People are committed to things all the time. It's just that when it comes to relationships, they often don't want to be committed because they're afraid. They have very little example before them of a successful relationship. So part of the fear is they don't know what that could look like to be faithful to someone for 30, 40, 50, 60 years. So there's the fear of not knowing, but you're committed to things already. The second, we already know that there's a sense of frustration when it comes to the sex abuse scandal or any other person in leadership who fails miserably. There's an erosion, absolutely, and we're frustrated. So juxtapose that with faithfulness. There's something amazing when we see someone who's faithful in a position and in a role. And then finally, this idea of male, female versus male, male, whatever. Here's the simple truth, is that we have reduced relationships down to passion, attraction, and common interests. But the church has never said that our marriage, when we look at it sacramentally, is about passion, attraction, common interests. In fact, you can have times where you're not passionate and it's still a valid marriage. You can have times where you don't feel attractive and it's still valid. And you can have times where there aren't common interests and it's still a sacrament. And so we're not talking about the same thing oftentimes. So part of our responsibility and opportunity is to share, here's what you see marriage and family as, here's what we see it as, and this is why we want to articulate it and speak about it that way. So, it's a little bit of a verbiage thing. I'm passing it on.
Who's willing to pick it up?
I'll continue with what you're saying. I mean, I think one of the small points that I would want to emphasize is just the understanding of what real freedom is. And, I think that, again, as you're saying, our culture just tells us so often that, we have to stay detached from as much as possible and with as few commitments as possible if we're going to be free to make decisions. And in reality, the more that we can give of ourself or give ourself in a commitment, in a totality, the more free we actually become. And it's so hard for our world right now to understand this, but in the smallest ways that we experience it, we find that the more committed we are to something, the easier it is to be ourselves, the easier it is to feel that we've been accepted as who we are, and the more that we can accept another for who they are. And so I think, in a sense, if a friend of ours who is not religious or who, is just living their married life, but, not in the Christian state, sees the elements that are going on within a Christian marriage where, we have our struggles, we have our failures, and we have our ups and downs, but in those things, both people are able to just be really themselves, really loved, really accepted. The spouse isn't speaking poorly of the other one. They're not whining and complaining about, them to their friends or to the public eye. They're not putting it on Instagram, like, I can't believe you didn't do the dishes again. You know, these little ways that
Sound like you're speaking from experience.
No, I don't do Instagram, so no.
I'm thinking of friends, but yeah.
But I've heard enough horror stories,
Yeah.
to know that those things really break, the heart of the spouse in many ways. They break down the relationship, and but they also go back to the fact that we're not living in an authentic freedom when we haven't completely given ourselves over. When we're withholding something from the other, we're failing to discover all of the treasure that is possible within that married life. And I think, again, like our lived witness of trying to demonstrate that we are all in and we don't expect it to end. We're not planning on having a check in 5 years to see if we want to keep doing this. God forbid that, bad times come and it gets hard, but we're expecting this to be until we're both in the grave. And, I think that that element of going all in is a huge witness, but also an invitation, because I think, as Chris said, people are hungry to know what that's like, and to feel like they belong, and to know that they're going to be loved despite their failures. And anyway, well, I'll let someone else say something now. But
yeah, if you look philosophically, John Paul was very good at bringing this out, and also from Balthasar, what you have is, look at the spiritual space that one person who is committed to the other person, the spiritual space that person A opens up in the world for person B, and that vice versa. B opens up for person A. And so you literally have got to be at the point where you appreciate the spiritual depths of being a person yourself, and have had some experiences of being around other people who essentially allow you to develop spiritually. And then hopefully that will become at its most successful for you in a marriage, because that person is going to help you to literally become, the army always used to say, be all that you can be. There's a certain sense spiritually that is true. That doesn't mean to say that, let's say a husband who's a lawyer is then going to become a Supreme Court justice. That's the wrong idea of the goal. But he may be a phenomenal lawyer because he has a spouse who is truly providing the other half of his life, if we can talk about it that way.
I also think part of the problem is vulnerability. People are wounded out there, and to know that you're making a commitment to this one person for the rest of your life, that opens you up to a lot of vulnerability that makes people uncomfortable.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what would change that dynamic, that uncomfortableness, is if people really truly understood what the nuptial gaze or the interior gaze is, that John Paul would talk about so beautifully. What is this interior gaze? The interior gaze is looking into the very soul of your spouse. And there are certain points of the interior gaze, that could bring about the interior gaze. There are certain things that that can trigger that kind of response. One of them is suffering. Suffering allows us to, as John Paul said so very beautifully, suffering unleashes love. And not that we have to, look for suffering, because suffering comes to us, but it's at those moments that we could start that process of looking in the interior of your spouse, entering into his mystery, into her mystery, as to how is this playing itself out, or just the vulnerability of one to another, where you have that chance to enter into the mystery of your spouse when she or he's having a hard time with something, or a difficult time with something, you know, and that's the beauty that's totally lost in a number of generations now, in Catholics and the world, is that's the beauty of natural family planning, that could allow us to enter into the mystery of our spouses. Especially it's such a it's such a blessing for the man, because he's able to now gaze within the heart of his wife, especially during those times of abstinence, especially during those times of not being able to get pregnant when you want to. You know, I think that the times where I fell in love with my wife most is when I would wake up in the morning to see her cry because she got her period. That to me was that trigger that allowed me to go into her spiritually, into the depths of her mystery, to see what was going on within her.
Yeah.
And we don't like, as a society, to think about to want to embrace whatever suffering God gives us. We try to avoid it at all costs. But you can't say it any better than the Holy Father. Suffering unleashes love.
Yeah.
And that's part of the pilgrimage of a marriage.
So Marie asks at this point from our viewers, the question that I was actually going to be just about wrapping up this evening's conversation with, and that is, so we talk about all of this, but what is the relevance of Christian marriage to society today? And she notes that she has a son who says that marriage is an obsolete social construct reflecting outdated property law. Now, we have that and a lot worse today.
Well, that's the Enlightenment view. I mean,
right.
You know, they tried to destroy marriage and take it away from the church so that they could take power from the church. And that's the prevailing view.
But looking at all of this, what we've been talking about tonight, as a takeaway from this conversation, when that comes up in conversation, because we know it all does, that why can't two gay people have the right to be happy and be married, and why can't the church recognize that, and all of that? What if each of you, what is your takeaway of demonstrating in a very practical way to the people that we know around us, because those are the lives that we impact, the relevance and the importance of Christian authentic marriage to society today?
True humanity you will only discover in a true marriage.
Who else?
I think the whole thing boils down to the fullness of the human voice. And the fullness of the human voice is spoken through the man and the woman together. Mm-hmm. Two men cannot possibly present to anyone the fullness of the human voice, nor can two women, but a man and a woman can. Mm-hmm. Because we come from two different planets. And when you bring them together and you speak as one, fullness of humanity is represented there. And we only have the scriptures to show us this. How did the fall come? Not when the woman ate the tree by herself, but when the man and the woman both did it. How did redemption come to us? Let it be done unto me according to your word. Father, not my will, but yours. So the fullness of humanity, again, in Jesus and Mary brings us redemption. And so we can't, I think the best way, in my opinion, the best way of speaking about this is that you're only talking half the message, you're not talking the full message.
Okay. Chris or Alissa, anything else to add to that?
Well, I mean, I think when we talk about same-sex attraction and marriage and things like that, I would rather have more time to really unpack that, to be real honest. But ultimately, I think that if we're talking about sacramental marriage, the reality of the man and the wife, it's meant to be this life-giving declaration, a witness in time of who God is. And so that's why I'm a proponent of that.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add to that, Alissa?
I mean, yeah, there's limited time, but just,
Yep.
you know, keeping in mind that that everything that happens within that married life is also part of the nuclear family that they may be creating. But even if they are not blessed with their own children, or they choose not to, you know, they're not called to adopt, or however that manifests, they're still part of the greater human family, as Father Bevil said. And you know, we are witnessing and learning at the same time the fraternal and the filial relationships that, you know, are present throughout all humanity. And so those things are being taught to one another, to our children, to our society that we interact with, our parish. And you know, that education of lived experience, you know, is really only possible there within that sacramental marriage and the demonstration that it gives. So you know, that brings a truth to society that other forms are not going to give.
Right. Well, in just the couple of minutes that we have left, I want to ask each of you one very simple question. Give your single most important tip for a husband and wife, a married couple, how to strengthen, fortify their marriage. I'll start with you, Father.
Pray together.
All right. Stephen?
I would echo that. Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, you need Jesus in your marriage.
Mm-hmm. And Alyssa?
A specific would be mercy. Experience mercy for yourself. Go to confession as often as you can so that you know that you're forgiven, but then turn and give that as quickly as you can to your spouse, to your children. And then that will allow you to give it to others as well. But, you know mercy for yourself and then share it.
Yeah, I'm reminded of Pope Francis's advice, which he's been giving for quite a long time, about some of the most important phrases are the please, I'm sorry, and thank you. I suspect I'm sorry is one of the most important. But he also said something about plates flying too, as I recall. Well, we are unfortunately out of time for this webinar this evening. I want to thank all of our panelists tonight, Stephen Bozza, Chris Padgett, Father Bevil Bramwell, and Alissa Thorell, for your expertise, for your good-natured humor. Chris, sorry for pushing your buttons. I hope that all of you will come back. I know, Chris, that we're planning to have a longer conversation about Humani Vitae and family life and youth, especially as we anticipate the Youth Synod. So I look forward to having you again. And Father Bevil, you're one of our mainstays, so thank you for your gift of time as always. And for all of you, thank you for joining us tonight. We hope as well that this has piqued your interest in the Catholic Distance University. You can go to www.cdu.edu to take a look at our university, our course offerings. Each of the professors who are here tonight teaches moral theology and a host of other very interesting courses. So please avail yourself of the opportunity to study under these professors. It's well worth your time. Once again, on behalf of the panel, on behalf of the Catholic Distance University, I'm Matthew Bunson. Thank you so much for being with us. Please have a blessed summer, and please stay tuned for the next webinar that'll be coming up in just a few weeks. Until then, take care and God bless.